Welcome back to Behind the Print podcast, where we feature industry leaders and uncover the creative minds and their businesses within the world of professional printing. Our mission is to provide you with inspiring, actionable resources that elevate your business projects and accelerate your journey to excellence in profit and print. Today's episode is Wildlife Advocate with a Camera, a life through the lens telling stories of the wild. And we're joined by a visual storyteller and wildlife advocate using her camera to bridge the gap between art, education, and conservation. Through photography, she brings the untamed beauty of nature to life while inspiring others to protect the creatures and places she photographs. Introducing Joanie Christian.
Hello.
Hey,
Thanks
how
for
you?
having me.
Of course. How are you doing today?
I'm good. I'm happy to be here with you.
Awesome. Well, we are so excited to have you on the show. I just love your calendar prints and man, your website is stunning.
Thank you. I have
Yes.
had a lot of really wonderful experiences and learned a lot along the way.
That's awesome. All you can ask for, really. So, can you tell me a little bit about who orders your photographs? Where have you seen some of your prints at?
I have a lot of different clients, a lot of local clients, as well as people around the country. Some of my calendars go overseas to Sweden and down into Ecuador. I think one goes to Australia occasionally as well. So it's become a really popular Christmas gift for people, especially local people who want to send images of our area to relatives or friends that live in other parts of the world. And so they can see our little corner of the world. And this calendar started off as just a calendar of local images only, and it's morphed over time to include images outside of the Inland Northwest because people love some of those images so much and they wanted me to include them in the calendar, even though they weren't taken here locally.
Totally, totally. And you're really focused on conservation and photographing those images that are limited. You know what I mean? Like they might not be here, and we're doing all our efforts that we can to bring that exposure to those animals, to that area of the wildlife, to that area in general. So,
Mhm.
how does your work help people understand or engage with wildlife and conservation efforts?
Well, I think that when people learn about an animal, they begin to care about an animal, not a specific animal, although sometimes that is the case in a specific individual animal. But when they begin to care, they make different choices. They pay attention to things. They contribute to different causes. They vote differently, all of those kinds of things. And I think that animals are just as multidimensional as humans are. And oftentimes, pictures or press or whatever might represent them in a very one-dimensional way. And I think part of my role is helping to see the whole animal. Yes, this animal is a predator, but it is also a mother and a very devoted mother. So it's when you show those different sides to animals, people can really relate to that. So you talked about how some of the things I photograph may not be there forever. And in the last year, in the Yellowstone and Tetons ecosystems, there have been, I think, 5 grizzlies that I photographed that have all died in the last year.
Wow.
Grizzlies. Grizzly 399 was one of them. She's probably the most famous grizzly in the world. And one of her cubs was hit and killed along the highway, as well as 399 different incidents. But this was one of her cubs from 2020, one of the quads, as they call them, which were the very famous set of 4 cubs that she had in 2020 when many people thought she may not come out of the den because she was so old and she might die over the winter. And instead, she came out with 4 cubs in this 2020 year, which was, as you know, COVID, and it was a very different time, let's say, but it also kind of spurred people to get out in nature. It was one of the places that seemed safe to be at a time that we weren't quite sure how our travel and vacation plans could still take place in the midst of an ongoing pandemic. And so she had those 4 quads and she drew people from all over the world. And then people learned her story. And whenever we would go to the Tetons and we would be watching the bears, or we would be watching for a bear to appear in a place where they're normally seen, people would stop and say, "What are you looking for? What are you watching for?" And they'd pull over with us and we'd start to talk and I would tell them her story. And by the time they left, they were complete 399 fans. And so it's she was really an advocate for the grizzly species and our ability to coexist with them. She was very relatable because of her mothering and how she would parent her cubs near the roadsides where people could see her, because it kept them protected from other boars, the males that often kill cubs in an effort to have the female go back into estrus so that they can breed. So she purposely raised her cubs by the road, which has hazards of its own, and she's had some of her cubs get hit and killed by cars. But she also taught them to look both ways before crossing. But it always wasn't the case, because we do have had some of her cubs were hit and killed by motorists. So she was one that was a very well-known bear that did die last October. She actually was far south of the Tetons, and she was known to go outside of the park in the fall when they're in that hyperphagia mode and trying to load up for hibernation and fatten up. And sometimes the food sources were better for her outside of the park, especially when she had a cub with her. And she did have a cub with her in this case. And fortunately, the cub was not hit. When she was hit, it was a yearling, and we are all hoping it is doing okay on its own. It was a very big cub and was suspected to be a male because of its size, but it was huge in comparison to the year that she had the 4 cubs as yearlings. So she was a bear that raised a lot of cubs to independence. I think she had 18 cubs total, or maybe 19 with the last one, but she was a really remarkable bear. So her loss was a huge loss to the grizzly conservation community and to all the people who followed her. But she literally had a fan page and Facebook groups just devoted to her. So she really inspired a lot of people. So one of her quads from that year was struck and killed also this last spring, I believe. And then a well-known bear in Yellowstone called Raspberry did disappear, and a carcass was found of a female sow that was small, but they didn't think it was her, but because she hasn't shown back up and she was very prominent and seen frequently by people who visited the park, it's likely that it was that bear or she was lost in some other way. And then there was another bear, 1063, in the Tetons that had her first litter of triplets in 2024. And they had came out of the den this year. They made it all year long, and then 2 of them were killed by a boar, and the other one got separated from her. But fortunately, even though it was a small yearling, it seems to have fared well and was independent and seen frequently throughout the summer by numerous people. So we're hoping that one has a good chance of survival as well. But all put together, that was 5 grizzlies that I have regularly seen and followed and photographed over the years that have all died this year. So, you're right. We don't always have a guarantee that these animals are going to be here forever, whether it be individuals like I just spoke about, or whether it is a species as a whole. And so, yeah, I think being able to teach people about the animals that I'm photographing has become a really important part of my work. And it's something I really enjoy because I wanted to photograph large game, but you don't always see large game. And what I often would see would be things like birds or smaller animals, and I wouldn't be very familiar with them. And so I would research about them and find out some really interesting information. So I would share that in my posts so that people would know more about them. And it turns out that there's a lot of really interesting traits that different animals have, or superpowers, or I'm just trying to think of an interesting example to tell you. Woodpeckers are a good example. They have really, really long tongues that they can put into the crevices of trees to get bugs and things, but they're so long that they don't fit in their mouth, and they actually go back into their mouth and wind up around the brain, and it actually protects the brain from the kind of a shock absorber of sorts for when they're drilling on trees. So that's a really interesting thing about them.
Never knew that.
Yeah, I mean, I really love animal trivia, so it's become part of my work in that I try and teach people not only things about their challenges in survival, but also just interesting things about them. Like an osprey has a much higher success rate catching fish than an eagle does. And it's partly due to how their talons are constructed, and they're more easily able to hold on to them. And so eagles will rely upon osprey to catch their fish, and then they will try and steal them. And there's a lot of midair battles that are very interesting to watch. And eagles can be quite bullies because they do, I think they're referred to as kleptoparasitic, meaning that they, I think that's the right term, that means that they often steal from other animals to get their food. So, but an osprey also will turn the fish, as if it's not in the right direction, they will turn the fish as they're coming up out of the water, because they will turn it in a direction that makes it more aerodynamic for them to fly. So they will typically turn the fish so that it's facing forward when they fly. Yeah.
That
So
is
really
so
cool stuff.
interesting.
Yeah.
I bet it's like
So
second nature to them because they're like, oh, flying this way isn't so easy. Let's turn it around and oh, this is way better. But to us, we're like, oh my gosh, you're magical.
yeah, I mean, but on the other hand, I've heard from somebody who was watching an osprey that was a juvenile this year that couldn't figure it out. They couldn't catch fish. When they got them, they didn't know what to do with it. So it's not necessarily an intrinsic thing. I think it's probably a
Right.
learned thing, and not all of them succeed. They didn't feel like that particular one was probably going to survive with those hunting skills that were deficient.
That's
And sometimes I
incredible.
do, yeah, I mean, there's some really, really interesting things about animals. And another thing I've learned is that I photograph and observe and do surveillance on owls. And owls, I don't know if it's all species of owls, but I know certain species like saw-whets and great horned owls, in the first year, they fluoresce under a black light, their wings do. And it's because of a substance called porphyrins that causes this fluorescing. And the experts believe that it's so that the parents can see them better at night and find them. But after a year, the porphyrins deteriorate and they no longer fluoresce under the black light.
That is so smart.
I know. There's really cool adaptations that nature has that we never knew about. So those are the things that I like to share because people find them really interesting. And so people do love my images, but many people share what they love just as much, if not more, is learning about the animal. And so, I think it is difficult for animals to survive out there. And if we look at owls as an example, the mortality rate of first year hatched owls is about 60 to 80%.
Oh,
So it's quite high.
yeah.
There's a lot of barriers for them to be successful, including human causes as well as natural barriers. So when you see one that does survive to maturity, it's a testament to having gone through a lot of trials.
Totally, totally. So, if you were to talk to a young photographer who was interested in big game and bird photography, what advice would you give them about your creative process?
Well, I would say it's important to get a basic understanding of photography so that you can use the camera that you have to the best of its ability to capture what you're hoping for. And then another piece of it is photography ethics, in that I don't think I always was this way. I've learned over time, but there are certain things that you can do as a photographer that can compromise them or make them more vulnerable. There are a lot of things about photography ethics that I think are important to follow so that you don't compromise them or put them at risk in any way. And there are ways to be able to observe an animal or a bird in a way that's respectful and you can still get a good picture. Now, of course, having a long lens is really helpful, not only for their safety, but for yours in some cases, depending on what you're photographing. But I think just really boning up on photography ethics of wildlife is important. Again, knowing your camera. And for me, I started off with a decent camera, but as I earned more money, I would replace that equipment with higher quality equipment so that I would have better capability of producing quality images, as well as having long lenses to be a respectful distance away from the animals. So it does cost quite a bit to invest in camera kits and gear that allows you to do that. Generally, if someone's using a cell phone and gets a close-up of an animal, they're too close. It really should be. There are some times when an animal will approach you, like we have deer and turkeys that come up to our porch. That is common here in the rural area where I live, but in general, when you're out and about looking for a wildlife, they should not approach you unless they're sick, in which case, and there's
Right.
been times when I have come across a sick animal that's turned into a rescue. And so I have become involved in that as well. So I would say that, I started off just wanting to get good photos, and it became more about learning about the animal and protecting the animal, and the fact that the photograph never comes before the animal's welfare.
I love that. That's really, really an important message that more photographers should know.
Yeah, I've seen some situations, like in the Tetons, there's always bear jams in the Tetons in Yellowstone, particularly that year with 399 and her four cubs. She just drew people from all over the place. And I would be in the meadow. We started off one morning just after dawn at our campground, and the place where she was known to be was just a couple miles away. So at dawn, we went to the meadow, and there was a bear in the meadow, but it wasn't her. And it was foggy, and it's all we could see. And we just sat there and watched this bear. It was a young boar. And as the fog began to lift and more people started to arrive, we could see 399 and the four cubs also in the meadow. And by the time the fog lifted 2 or 3 hours later, the entire probably 2 mile stretch of the meadow was cars lined up on both sides of the road and photographers along the entire meadow. So most of the people were good and respectful, but you often see some unethical behavior. You see them getting too close, or there were times when I would see photographers follow her across the road and be within 20 feet of her and her cubs. And that is not safe for the photographer, but it also
Mhm.
puts the animal at risk because she's going to defend her cubs.
Yep.
And there's many occasions where a grizzly is aggressive or attacks or charges or something like that, and they have to make a decision whether or not to euthanize the bear
Right.
or whether to let it continue to live.
Yeah.
And their determination comes down to whether the bear was acting naturally in defense of either a cub or offspring or a food cache. Those are the times when they consider that natural behavior and they don't euthanize the bear most of the time. And Grizzly 399 did have an attack many years ago. A gentleman who was a teacher and was at a conference at Jackson Lake Lodge was on a walk and found himself between 399 and one or more cubs. I think it was a couple cubs that year, and a carcass. And then on top of it, a moose came behind him and startled him. And he thought he was going to be safe and just back away. But the moose startled her and him. And then she attacked because instinctually, she just acted on that change. And he begged for them not to euthanize her. He said she was acting normally and protecting her cubs and protecting her food. And they did decide against euthanizing her. And this was before she became well known. And that one decision dictated the whole rest of her lifetime, and what she essentially became an advocate for grizzlies, probably
Right.
the best one we have ever had. And that would not have happened had that decision been different way back when that teacher was mauled. He had a pretty significant injury, but when she died, he returned to the site to pay tribute to her. So this was probably 15, 20 years ago that he was mauled. I think he was a science teacher, if I remember right.
Wow.
And so it was really interesting to see that even with that event that happened, he still felt very strongly that her life should be spared. And then we see the aftermath of that and what she contributed and how many people came to know about grizzlies because of her. And there was a documentary about her as well that was actually up for an Emmy. It came out in May of 24, just 6 months before she died. And it was on PBS, and it was at some local film festivals in Jackson as well. But it's a really interesting story to watch. And it talks about not only how remarkable she was, but also the challenges with trying to protect wildlife with all the crowds. And
Right.
because she was so acclimated to people, she wasn't afraid of them, and neither were her cubs. And so they would go right into downtown Jackson during the fall when they were hunting for food, and they would get into trouble getting into livestock feed. And beehives and things like that, and garbage cans that were there at the time. They didn't have bare secure garbage cans in the city of Jackson. And that has led to some changes as well. And unfortunately, she and her cubs have paid the price in order to learn those lessons, but those lessons, I think, are being learned. So yeah, she was very comfortable around people. And part of that was to protect her cubs, but on the back end of it, when they got bigger, it became a liability.
Yeah, yeah, totally. We'll have to check out that PBS documentary. That sounds really, really interesting.
The original show was 90 minutes and they cut it to 60 for the airing on PBS. And we were actually in the 90-minute segment in that morning I talked about, where we were all lined up in the meadow.
Uh-huh.
And so that was a really interesting thing to see us in that clip. But yeah, she was a remarkable bear. And so I do have on my gallery a Tetons gallery that's devoted to just her. And I've only seen her 3 or 4 times, but she definitely made an impact on me. And I was, like many people, quite devastated when she was hit. We were hoping that she would break records in terms of longevity and how long she continued reproducing, because she was still healthy and doing well at the time of her passing. But unfortunately, that wasn't meant to be.
Yeah, unfortunately. Shoot. Well, what are some major milestones that your business has brought you to?
I think I'm starting to get published more broadly published. I have National Wildlife Federation, Crikey Magazine. They did have a contest and I was a finalist there. So I had a number of images that were on display at the Queensland Museum in Australia, which was really cool. I've won a number of regional contests. This year I was a category winner for the National Forest Foundation. And so that was really cool. It's really nice to see your work in publications. Like, there's a local publication here. It's a regional free publication that is a neutral publication that is nonpartisan. It's really more about, the focus is about topics that bring us together as a community. And there's a wide distribution in Northeast Washington, over into Idaho a little bit. I don't know what the actual distribution of it is, but I'm coming up on about 90 covers for that magazine now. And it's been a great thing to be a part of that. So it's really nice to see my work published. I've been interviewed on the news, at the Spokane News before. I do a lot of writing as well. And some of my work has been shared with syndicates. There was a story about 5 or 6 years ago. I had 2 hummingbirds show up at my feeders in December. And I live in Northeast Washington, where we get a lot of snow and sub-zero temps.
Right.
And this was the middle of December. It was snowing. They were at the feeders, and I had left them up because I leave my feeders up because migrating birds from the north need to feed on their way down to their winter spot. But Anna's hummingbirds don't migrate. And so they tend to stay put for the winter. And they originally were in Baja, California. And over the last century, they have moved northward along the West Coast. And they're now year-round residents of the Seattle and West Coast area,
That's
which is
so
much more
cool.
temperate. Yeah, it is. But they are still continuing to expand their territory. And when I realized that I had some hummers that were not likely to leave, I reached out to Facebook groups and a lot of other people here and all the way east over as far as Montana and Wyoming. They had them. And they were like, we don't know what to do with these birds. The feeders will freeze. And so I wrote an article, did some research about how we can help these little hummers make it through the winter. And the one that I had made it through February, and then I think migrated, or at least looked for a different place in the territory where I could find a male, because that's typically when they depart for mating season. The year where I had the one, we had some -10-degree temps shortly after I discovered them. And that's why I wrote the article, because I knew that people were going to be worried about how do we keep these little guys alive in a place that they're really not suited to live in. I
Right.
seem to be a magnet for critters with not great survival odds, but I did my best. I have a greenhouse out in the back. We put a heater out there. It would perch in my greenhouse at night and go into torpor at night. And I had a heated feeder on the deck. And so it would come, and I spent a whole day in a blind on my deck photographing the Hummer in a snowstorm, which you don't see that very often. I really love unusual situations like that. But it also teaches us a lot about why is this phenomenon happening? Why are they moving eastward and moving out of their normal territory and into a spot that isn't conducive to survival for them? The ones
Right.
that showed up a couple of years ago, we had actually, ironically, a hummingbird survey across the state on December 21st, and it was expected to get to minus 22 that night. And I had still had the heater on in the greenhouse, but those two weren't using the greenhouse as the other one had. And they disappeared after that night, as did all the others that people had reported. So I suspect they perished in that extreme cold.
Snowstorm. Yeah.
But two more have shown up this year. So I have had them show up about 2 to 3 weeks ago at my feeder. So I once again have my heated feeder out and the greenhouse is getting heated. And so we have the Christian's hummingbird Airbnb out in the greenhouse. So
It's awesome. I love that. Christian's Airbnb birdhouse. You need a
yeah,
sign.
I know. Right now it's a she shed sign, but I probably should change it. But yeah, it's really miraculous when you see these birds prevail through adverse conditions. Why they're coming here, I don't know. There's a lot of speculation about climate change and how it's getting warmer. And as an example, here it is, what, the 5th of November? Yeah, 5th of November, typically when we start getting our first snow and the flowers in my window boxes are still blooming, which
Wow.
is not something that I would have seen 10 or 15 years ago. So there
Oh,
are some changes that are maybe making them change their territory, but I do what I can to help them. And they're wild critters and they do their own thing. And if they choose to go stay somewhere else that's going to be too cold and they perish, I can't do anything about that, but I do what I can. So, and
that's
I document
awesome.
it. Yeah.
Yep. Documenting, that's really important. And congratulations on all those magazines and features that you've been in. That's just
Yeah.
incredible.
Thanks. Yeah, I love doing what I do. I'm freelance. I'm not full time. I work a different day job that pays the bills and gets the health insurance. But over the years, I've just gained a little bit more visibility year by year. And so that's nice to have that happen. And I've become more involved in different conservation projects or owl surveillance or whatever, which is important to me. I mean, the photos are great, but if there's an opportunity to help an individual animals or species as a whole, I'm all in for that. And sometimes, even though I don't sell a lot of large prints or anything, I tend to sell a lot of smaller items like calendars, which is they sell very well. And I think, people get 12 images that they could put in a frame for a really reasonable price, right? And it's very high quality. I don't know if you'll be able to see it, but this is my calendar this year.
You guys,
Um,
this calendar is stunning. All of the images on the inside are just magnificent. They are breathtaking. You guys definitely have to check out this calendar.
and my website has all of the same images in there. Like this year, like I said, I did depart from my usual MO and I included images from other areas. So I have some Costa Rica images in there from my August trip. I had 2 weeks there and I visited the Caribbean side in Tortuguero National Park, where you have to go in by boat for a 2 hour ride. It looks like it's a solid landmass on the map, but it's not. It's all like wetlands and waterways and mangrove groves and all of that. Just really got to see a lot of amazing wildlife that I've never seen before. It was hard to leave because it was so amazing. And I produced a video about it that was just highlighting the flora and fauna. And I saw, heard, or photographed 157 new bird species in Costa Rica. So I was super excited about that. And
Holy,
they
that's
ranged from little tiny birds all the way up to huge scarlet macaws that are 2 to 3 feet long. So that was very cool. And I do have, I think, a basilisk from Costa Rica in the calendar and a sloth. That was really fun to see. I saw both a three-toed and a two-toed sloth. I didn't realize until I went that there are two different kinds of sloths down there. And the three-toed one was climbing down from a tree and just briefly looked at me. And they always look like they're smiling. So I really love that little sloth photo. And then
me
I have
too.
some pictures from Alaska in there. I've been really fortunate to have been a Denali Road Lottery recipient And the first time I went with my husband, I don't know if they're still doing the lottery, but back in the 1990s, they were having more trouble with overcrowding and wildlife human interactions. And so they closed the park to the public going in their own cars. There's just a single road that goes through the whole park. It's about 90 miles. And they opened it up to bus tours only. And so that was the only way that you could go in. But people really missed that ability to drive in on their own. So they opened up the road lottery at the end of the season for 4 days, where you could purchase a ticket in advance for a chance to be drawn as one of the lottery winners for one of those 4 days. And I think they had 300 or 400 lottery winners for each day. And so your chances were fairly good of being drawn. And you would, if you were drawn, you would be able to go in your own car through the park from 6 a.m. to midnight. And so my husband and I first had a ticket that was drawn, and then a couple of years later, some friends and I all pooled together and bought a bunch of tickets, and two of our tickets were drawn. So we had 2 days in the park, which was really amazing. So because one day was full fall color, and the second day we went in, it had snowed, and it was a completely different park. So it was
Ah,
very cool to see that. And it's kind of like stepping back in time. It almost reminds me of like where you would see dinosaurs walking. There's this big, huge sort of moonscape looking land, and grizzlies and huge moose and ptarmigan and doll sheep and caribou. It was just amazing. And I think on our second day, on the day of the snow, I think we saw 12 grizzlies that day. And we saw in our last 15 minutes of the park, probably 15 or 20 moose, because it was rut and they wouldn't let you out of the car in that one section where there was a lot of, a high concentration of moose. And so we were watching from the car, but they're just enormous. And some of them, they would be bedded down like a half mile away, and their antler rack was so huge and white that the sunlight was reflecting off of it, and you could see it a half mile to a mile away because their antlers were so huge. That's all you could
that's
see. The
cool.
rest of them were down in the bush, but the antlers were so big they
Right.
stuck up above everything, and so you could spot the moose that way. It was pretty cool. So
Totally.
yeah, it was really a privilege to be able to go to that park in that way on a couple of occasions, and definitely a bucket list item for me for sure. And that is one thing that I did write an article about in the Spokesman Review, was about that girls' trip. And so it was an amazing trip for many reasons. Many of the women that I was with, we hadn't known each other prior to the trip, and one of them got injured and had a broken leg just beforehand, but was so bummed about not being able to go. And we're like, oh, we can make this work. So we just helped her with her crutches and her little walker and all of that to get us all to where we needed to be on the trip. And we made it work. And we referred to ourselves as our tiny village. So our tiny village helped our compadre with a bum leg be able to still experience the park with us. So it was amazing.
That is just amazing, inspiring, and magical. Oh my goodness, that would just be so fun. Go drive through your own car, finding all these awesome animals and elk with their antlers and stuff. Wow. Wow.
I know. Oh, I was just going to say, I think that a lot of people who are well known in the industry are men. And there are some phenomenal female photographers, many who I follow that aren't as well known as the men. And I think many of them kind of photograph from a different perspective. Many of their images feel more intimate. I think maybe we have maybe a different slant. I don't mean to be sexist in this. I
Oh,
just notice a
no.
difference in the work sometimes. Now that's not always true. I see some male photographers who do exactly what I'm doing. They really want to teach their followers or viewers about the animals that they're photographing, and they do so in a really eloquent way. And other people are more just about the photograph. It all depends on the person. But I am seeing in my travels over the last 10 or 15 years a lot more women photographers. And there's a time that I went to the Tetons without my husband. He had a work commitment, couldn't go, and I had an opportunity to go on a guided tour. And so I went by myself for the first time, which was a different experience. I much prefer traveling with my husband. He's my adventure buddy. But at the same time, it was really interesting because as I drove all these back roads, I tend to go off the beaten path because that's where you often see wildlife, right?
Yep.
And I would meet another car on the road and it would be another woman or another group of women. And there would be no men with them at all. So it's become, I don't know, maybe it's just a hobby for some, but it's become a profession for many women as well. And they are really leading the way. And I love seeing that. Melissa Grew is somebody who is one of the better known female photographers, and she has a regular article in Outdoor Photography. And going back to our earlier topic about photography ethics, she has some articles about photography ethics and what that means and what that looks like. So I would
That's so
recommend that for young
inspiring.
photographers. Yeah.
Yeah, so inspiring for young photographers out there who might be women who are just looking for an avenue and not really sure whether to take that leap of faith or not. But that's just
Mhm.
so inspiring how you're seeing more women get out there, photography, doing their photography, doing what they love to do, and making it not just a passion, but into a business.
Yeah, I think, and there's so many different ways to go. I mean, there's a glut of wildlife photographers out there. I think it's much harder to make a living in the industry than it used to be. There were just a handful of well-known photographers way back when that photographed for National Geographic and some of the other, I don't know, AP or some of those other outlets. But there's literally thousands of people, and the digital age has made it much easier to photograph and to also edit. I do spend a considerable amount of my time editing. I shoot my images in RAW, meaning that there's no adjustment within the camera at all. And for those who might be what they might refer to themselves as purists and not like to have any editing, the camera doesn't have the same dynamic range that the human eye does. And it will adjust. It basically gives you information about what it's seeing, and then you adjust your settings from there to try and get the best image you can out of that scene or that subject that you're photographing.
Right.
But if you're not shooting in RAW, you're generally shooting in JPEG format, and the camera does the editing in camera for you. So if you think that you're a purist and not doing any editing, your camera has edited your JPEGs because it's constantly adjusting based upon the lights and darks and the colors and tones that it sees. So shooting in RAW gives you the ability to adjust your images without compressing the data so that you have as high of a quality of a finished product as you can. And it often gives you the ability to attempt anyway to replicate the scene you actually saw, because it's very common, especially in certain lighting situations, that what the camera produces and what you saw are two completely different things. And so you use that editing to, I see the raw images like the stone before the carving happens. Like sculptors will say they see the carving that they plan to do by looking at a rock or whatever. I see that raw image that way. Sometimes, rarely, but sometimes I have a raw image that I don't do anything with because it's great as is. But most of the time, I'm adjusting lights and darks, and I'm adjusting the composition to better flatter the subject or depict the scene that I'm wanting to show. And if I'm shooting wildlife from a distance, then it makes sense to be far away. It makes sense to shoot from far away for their safety and to be respectful of them. But if you shoot with a camera that has a high resolution, you have the ability to crop and still have a close-up image that looks like you're right there with the animal when you're really not. So I have a lot of people that say, you're too close. I'm worried about your safety. And I'm like, I'm not close to this animal. And generally, if I'm photographing grizzlies, I'm in a national park and there's a whole bunch of other people around me. Typically, that's usually the scene that's present. Sometimes we've happened upon something before anybody else gets there, but there's usually a lot of people, including park rangers there, and the bears are quite a distance away. And they are pretty acclimated to people. Now, I would never attempt to be that close, even outside my car, in a place other than a national park, because the bears do act differently there because they're used to people. But that doesn't mean we take them for granted. They're still wild animals, and we still need to respect them, because if we don't, they're usually the ones that pay the price.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, unfortunately that is true, but that's a huge testament to shooting in RAW for all the photographers out there because that just sounds like a huge leg up. More editing, but your image is going to look spectacular.
yeah, I think that there are some photographers that love both parts of the process. I happen to love editing because I feel like that's where the magic happens a lot of times. But I know other photographers who really hate being in front of a computer and really don't want to do a lot of editing, and that's completely up to them. But for me, I think that editing reflects more of the work that I'm trying to put out there. And I think it is more complimentary of the subject as well, too, when you take out all the shadows and things like that that are affected by that lighting situation. When you lift shadows and you can see details, people really respond to seeing detail. They're not called eyelashes, but hummingbirds have things that look like eyelashes above their eyes, and but you would never notice it unless you saw that kind of close-up image. And there's a lot of other things that I pick up too that I don't expect. Sometimes I will see an injury. I will see old scars. It's not uncommon to have a moose just have scars all over its face from particularly bull moose that are in rut with one another. And interestingly, I've seen moose dueling before at Turnbull National Wildlife Refuge. We were pretty much skunked going through the park and through the refuge. And just as we came out, we saw a car pulled over, and there were two bull moose dueling, and we watched them for about 20-30 minutes, and they were right at the edge of the road. So of course we were all just sticking really close to our cars, but it was incredible. But it was really violent, and they were pretty evenly matched, but then one ended up on the ground and the other one was just going after him. And I thought, I wonder if this other one's going to get up, and he did. And he lost the duel, and literally the female walked out of the woods and walked off with the winner after that duel was over. But you can see by watching duels like that how they get so beat up looking. But
Hmm.
interestingly, when rut is over, they're buddies again. So they fight and
Crazy.
fight almost to the death, and then 2 or 3 weeks later, they're all camped out together in a pod of bull moose. Like at the Tetons, I often see 6, 8 together, and when one gets up to go forage, they all get up to go forage. When one lays down to rest, they all go rest. It's like they're chums. So it's really strange how nature is. There must be a really strong biological urge or hormonal factors or something, but they are mortal enemies, and then they are best buds about a month later.
Totally. Oh my gosh, that's just so interesting. I would have never thought of that.
Yeah.
That they would go back to
I
being
see a
friends
lot of really interesting
afterwards.
things, and I learn a lot
Oh,
by
I
watching.
bet.
Yeah.
I
And
bet.
I'm kind of a sponge. I really like to, if I see something I don't understand or some behavior, I'm wondering what it is, I will go look it up and I will find out what it is. Like loons, some of my most favorite subjects to photograph are grizzlies, owls, loons, and hummingbirds. I love anything. Sloths have become a new favorite, actually, but I'm not going to see them very often. But loons have an interesting behavior where they'll stick. Here's another little trivia thing if you want to know about loons. Loons have legs on the back end of their bodies, and so they cannot walk well on land, and they cannot take off from land. They have to take off from the water. So they have to be on a lake that gives them enough space to take off, because they do that kind of running thing
Adult.
with
Yeah.
their. Mhm. But when they are raising chicks, and the rest of the time actually too, they will often lift a leg out of the water and sort of wag it backwards behind them. And I'm like, what are they doing? Well, it's called foot slipping or foot shipping. I can't remember which one it is, but yeah, there's a term for it, and they are not sure what it is, but they think it might have to do with thermal regulation.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow. That's so interesting. I'm gonna have to look up that. Foot
Yeah.
slipping, foot shipping,
Yeah.
one of the two.
Yeah.
I have a question
But
about your calendar.
sure,
What is your return on investment for those calendars?
it depends on how many I order.
Right.
the the profit margin goes up the more I sell, because the cost for each one diminishes as your
Lowers
quantity
the
goes.
unit.
And so for a photographer that's ordering a smaller quantity, their profit margin isn't going to be as high. I tend to charge less for my calendar than a lot of other wildlife photographers do who charge upwards of $30 or $35. I debated whether to increase this year because there have been some increases in costs, particularly with shipping.
Yeah,
But I kept them at $20, which that's a bargain for
totally.
having basically frameable pictures,
Yeah.
12 of them. And then I also include extra pictures in the free pages that are afterwards too. So people really like being able to frame them. And I live in a small community that's fairly low income, and they're kind of priced out of larger prints and things because my printing costs are very high, oftentimes more than people want to pay just for my cost alone. Not to
Right.
mention trying to put a little bit of on top to make a little bit of a profit. So
Mhm.
the costs involved with taking the photos are much higher than people think.
Yeah.
I'm traveling all over the place. I'm buying and repairing camera gear all the time. I have numerous subscriptions that I use for editing. I use the Creative Cloud suite, Adobe Photoshop and Lightroom. I use Topaz. I have website domains. I have a website that has my work. And then, of course, all the Microsoft Office products that are used as well too. So all of those subscriptions really add up
Yeah.
fast
Yeah. You
because they're
definitely
getting
have
more and
to,
more expensive. Yeah.
yeah, you definitely have to be into it and kind of know what you're doing before you sign up for those subscriptions, or you might be losing money as a photographer.
Yeah, you have to be selective. Those are the ones that I consider essential for my work.
Totally.
Don't always use them. It all depends on the situation or the image. If I'm taking pictures in low light,
Mhm.
that produces grain. Even though I have a camera that does, I use a Canon R5 currently, and it does very well in low light situations. My previous camera was extremely grainy at a 2000 ISO, but I can go up to 4000 and still have it be a usable image if I'm using a denoising program like Topaz.
Right.
But when you're shooting in low light situations, oftentimes wildlife is seen early in the morning or late at night when the light is low. And
Uh,
so that's a pretty common thing when you're a wildlife photographer, is shooting in those situations. And so, you want to the best of your ability in terms of your budget, get a camera that will allow you to shoot in low light and still have a usable image, and then use tools available to you to sharpen it up, to take out some of that grain that you were forced to have in that picture just due to those low light situations. So, but the low light situations are where a lot of really magical stuff happens. Um,
yes.
yeah, so I definitely want to keep shooting in those areas. So I just use the tools that I have available to me. But back to your original question, Printing Center USA has been really amazing to work with because they produce such a high quality calendar. And originally, I started producing calendars when my kids were first born 35 years ago. That was my first calendar, not a wildlife calendar, it was a family calendar. But I was going to a copy center and they were just running it off a copy paper, and they were doing a spiral binding and all of that. And there's a huge difference between that type of a calendar and this beautiful calendar that has the saddle stitch binding and the chipboard, and it's shrink wrapped. It's just very professional, and people love it because it makes great gifts that not only can they wrap and know are going to be secure under the tree, but they can ship it and know that it's going to arrive and it's still going to be in good condition. So the color is beautiful. I always choose the extra finish on the cover because I use so much color and it does really enhance it. And that's one comment I get from people, is like, your covers are amazing. They're just like vibrant and just luscious, and they are, but it's because of that finish. And so I love being able to work with a company that shows off the images. It does them justice. And so people really love having these calendars. And some people have told me that it's become their family tradition. I have people that will buy 15 or 20 from me every year, and they will just give it out to friends and family. And they've told me that a lot of them are people that grew up with my kids, that we raised our kids together and stuff. And they love that local connection. But they said, this is my kid's favorite Christmas gift every year. So I love that. That's very
Well, we
rewarding.
are so lucky and fortunate to be able to help you with that process. Like, that's just so moving to hear about, oh, it's their favorite Christmas gift, or they can ship it because it's got chipboard and the cover is like, Thank
Yeah.
you. We are just so
You're
lucky,
welcome.
lucky, lucky, lucky.
So my next project, I hope to, I have a nature book series that I've been percolating on for a while. And so that is one that I have been reaching out to my account rep or customer rep to see what options are there. I'm just in the process of beginning a layout on those and hope to get those going in the new year. So that'll be a new kind of venture for me, but something that's really exciting for me, especially because it allows me to go further than the calendars in terms of educating people and
Right.
promoting conservation. And I think it's going to be an interactive book series for all ages. And that's all I'll say for the moment, but I'm really excited to work on it. And I like trying new things. As a photographer, you can't make a living on prints for the wall because most people it's out of their price range. And so you start thinking about what other kinds of products in the market would set you apart from other photographers.
Right.
So that's the direction I'm heading there. So hopefully Printing Center USA and I can partner again or collaborate on this project too.
Totally. We would be honored. And I'm really looking forward to that book because I know it'll be so interactive, so fun, and all of the information in it is just going to be like you were mentioning earlier, all those fun facts you told me. I was like, I'm never going to forget those. Those are going to be stuck in my head now. Like,
I
that's just
know.
going to be so exciting. Oh, I'm so proud of you. That's awesome.
Well, thank you. I love doing what I'm doing. It's something that I don't think I'll ever stop. The only way I'll stop is because I can't do it anymore for some reason. I will be doing this for as long as I can. So,
That's
regardless of what age I am. It's a relatively late in life venture for me. I was always a photographer. I am self-taught. I took a high school class and I took one college class, but mostly self-taught, especially, I mean, the digital age changed everything in terms of how do we photograph. Well, not everything, because composition and all those lighting rules and everything like that still remain, right?
right.
In terms of how we produce an image, that's completely changed. And I no longer spend a fortune on prints that I only like, 2% of them. And going back to your topic of advising prospective young photographers, you have to shoot a lot
Yes.
because I only am really very happy with about 1 to 2% of what I take. If I'm shooting a moose, I'll set my camera so that I've got sequential rapid fire shooting. And then I will look through to see what is the best and I will work from there. And it's surprising if you have a group of 15 shots, there is often one that's significantly better than the rest.
Right.
And
No, that's
whether
so
it be
true.
lighting or whether it be an angle or, whatever, it really does help to shoot a lot. When I'm photographing people and doing portraits, which I don't often do, I mostly do it for friends and family. I will shoot a lot on purpose if I'm doing a wedding, as an example, because there's always somebody shutting their eyes or making a weird face or looking down at the ground, especially little kids. And so I will use Photoshop in those cases to swap out faces so everybody's smiling. I don't do that with my photography. I do use some removal if I see like a fence post or something, or like there, as an example, I was shooting an image of some fox kits outside of Jackson, Wyoming, and there's one of the rules in photography ethics is that you don't bait animals. And there's a number of valid reasons for that. But in the case of foxes, they tend to be pretty opportunistic and they will go into trash cans and dumpsters and all kinds of things to get food. And the mother or parent will drop off literally a lunch bag. If they find a lunch bag in the garbage can, they will dump off the lunch bag right outside the den. The babies will come up and they will eat whatever's in there. So they'll drop off lunch bags, they'll drop off ground squirrels that they just caught. So there's just like this, you know, array of
Yeah.
foods to eat. But if I see an open can of something, I don't want that in my picture. I'll remove it out of the picture.
Right, right.
I didn't put it there and I didn't bait them, but I definitely don't want it in my picture. So in those cases, I will remove the can just because I'm after an image, a final image that doesn't have that in it. I will sometimes use it if I'm like entering a contest or wanting to provide documentation of human animal interactions and how those two
Oh yeah.
interface with one
Right.
another. Those are the times that I will use the image as it was shot. But if I'm using it as something to self to go on somebody's wall, no one wants garbage on their wall. So those are the times that I will remove something from it. But generally, everything I have is as shot. So,
Oh, that's really cool. And I love how you mentioned you wouldn't rather be doing anything else because my next question is kind of ironic. If you had a day free to spend however you like and you weren't doing photography, what would you be doing?
oh gosh. Well, I would be outside doing something probably. I mean, I really love being outdoors. And I started off, I grew up out in the country and I would be out in the woods during the day. We'd make tree forts, or I'd be looking at the lady slippers or picking mushrooms or something. I mean, I think I maybe have a hunter-gatherer sort of
Yes, totally. Oh my gosh, it
lineage.
sounds like it.
Yeah, so I do like doing that kind of thing. I mean, one of my favorite things to do is huckleberry pick, and I take my camera, of course, in case I see something cool. Sometimes we do. I'm usually the diehard of the bunch. If I'm going up with my family, they're all ready to go long before I am, but I love being there. I'm up in the mountains. It smells
Yeah.
wonderful. The birds are singing. My family's there. There's no cell phone or other distractions, and we're getting a lot of great berries that we can look forward to fun recipes and special events at home down the road. So that is something I love doing in the summertime. Yeah. And this
Well,
was
you
an
will.
awesome huckleberry year.
Yeah, it really was. You'll have to come over here over to Montana, visit us at headquarters, and then go huckleberry picking after.
Yeah, that would be fun. I'd love that. Here you have some great huckleberries over there. They were huge this year, like the end of my finger are huge. And so we got, I think, about 4.5 gallons this year. So in my writing that I do, I have a column or a segment in a new Idaho magazine called Seasons of the 208. And so my segment is Seasons Bounty. So my summer article was about huckleberries and some of my experiences as a kid and how to get the most efficient huckleberry bucket for picking.
That sounds like an article I need to read.
Yeah, you want two-handed picking. You don't want to be hanging on to a can with one hand and picking with the other. Yeah. Double your picking quantity that way. So
Yep.
yeah, you have to pick it up and find the summer edition. Yeah.
Okay, I will. I will. So, how can our listeners get in touch with you, buy prints, visit your website? How can they collaborate with you?
Well, I have a website. It's just JoanieChristianPhotography.com, and it's CHRISTIAN. I have an Instagram page that's at Joanie Christian Photography, and then you can look me up by my name on Facebook as well. I don't have as many followers yet on Instagram as I do on Facebook. I'm trying to get better about posting to both places and learning Instagram more, but you can find me there too.
Oh, cool. Well, you guys heard her. So be sure to show her some love. Head over to Instagram and follow her at Joanie Christian Photography and Joanie Christian on Facebook and visit her website at joniechristianphotography.com. But
Thank you.
that's another wrap on another episode of Behind the Print podcast. Thanks to our listeners for joining us as we have explored the artistry and innovation of the printing world. Remember, having a strong vision and using tools like print to amplify your message will make your brand stand out from the crowd. If you've enjoyed today's episode, be sure to stop by PrintingCenterUSA.com and get yourself a free sample pack to share with your fellow business enthusiasts. And until next time, keep those creative sparks flying and remember, there's always more to discover behind the print.